I was in my car when Dale said Margaret Coburn's name. He said it the way he said everything on those broadcasts, steady, conversational, like a man reading a bedtime story to a child he'd known for years. He said her house had a crack running along the foundation on the east side, near the dryer vent that she'd been meaning to get patched since April. He said the third step on her back porch had a soft spot in the wood that gave about half an inch when you stepped on it. He said the back door hadn't locked properly since the previous winter, and that she knew it, and that she'd told her daughter on the phone about it 2 weeks ago, but hadn't called a locksmith because it seemed like the kind of thing that could wait. Then he paused. I could hear him take a breath through the speakers, a small wet sound very close to the microphone. "Margaret," he said, "you should check what's under the green tarp in your husband's workshop in the back, behind the miter saw." Bill kept very good records. I turned the car around so fast I nearly clipped the guardrail on Route 9. It was 11 o'clock on a Tuesday in October, and I'd been driving back to my mother's house from the gas station with a bag of ice and a case of beer that Marcus had asked me to pick up. The radio in my mother's old Subaru only got AM, and for 5 days now there was only one station worth paying attention to anywhere within range of Harlow, New York, WKRL 1630 on the dial, a station that had been dead since October 1987. I got to Margaret's house in 4 minutes. The lights were on downstairs. I could see her through the kitchen window, standing perfectly still, and I knew by the angle of her head that she was listening to something. I sat in her driveway with the engine idling and Dale's voice still coming through the speakers. He'd moved on to something about a set of property records filed in 1989, and I tried to figure out what I was going to say when I knocked on her door at 11 o'clock on a weeknight. "Hi, Margaret. The dead man on the radio is talking about your husband. Mind if I check your workshop?" I knocked. She opened the door and the look on her face told me everything I needed to know. She'd heard it. She had a radio on the kitchen counter, an old GE clock radio, and it was tuned to 1630. I could hear Dale's voice in her kitchen, doubled with the version still playing in my car behind me. A half-second delay between the two that made his words feel like they were circling. "I already looked," Margaret said. She was holding a manila envelope against her chest with both hands. Her fingers were white. "Ethan, I already looked." I didn't ask her what she'd found. Not that night. She wasn't ready. And honestly, I wasn't either. I told her to lock up, to call her daughter, to not go anywhere alone. The kind of useless advice people give when the thing that's happening doesn't have a procedure. She nodded and closed the door, and I stood on her porch in the dark and listened to Dale Morrow's voice coming from 2 radios at once, describing the interior of someone else's home now, someone on the other side of town. And I thought, this is the 5th night, 5 nights of this, and it's getting worse. Let me go back. My name is Ethan Marsh. I'm 34. I grew up in Harlow, moved to Albany when I was 18, and spent the next 16 years building a life that had almost nothing to do with the town I came from. I worked in data management. I had an apartment, a routine, the sort of existence that doesn't generate stories. I came back to Harlow in September because my mother died and someone had to deal with the house. I should tell you about Harlow, because the town matters. It's not a small town, not really, around 12,000 people. Enough to have a downtown with a hardware store and a diner and 2 churches and a bar that's been there since the 70s. It sits in a valley in the western part of New York State, and for most of the 20th century, it was a company town. The company was Marsh Chemical, my family's company. My grandfather Gerald Marsh founded it in 1954, and for 35 years it employed about a third of the adult population of Harlow. It closed in 1993, 2 years after my grandfather died, and the town has been slowly deflating ever since. Not dying. Harlow's not dead, but thinner, quieter, the kind of place where people stay because leaving feels like giving up on something they already lost. I didn't know much about WKRL when the broadcasts started. I knew the call letters. Everyone in Harlow over a certain age knew them. The transmitter tower was still standing on Cheswick Hill at the eastern edge of town, a 200-foot lattice of rusted steel visible from just about anywhere in the valley. The station building at its base had been locked up since 1987. The tower itself was supposed to be decommissioned and torn down multiple times over the years. but the property was tied up in some legal tangle involving the original owner's estate, and nobody cared enough to push it through. It just stood there, skeletal against the sky, the way old infrastructure does in towns like this. Part of the landscape easy to stop seeing. Marcus Cole is the one who identified the signal. Marcus is my oldest friend. We grew up 3 streets apart, and unlike me, he never left Harlow. He works IT for the county, builds custom PCs on the side, and has an amateur radio setup in his garage that he's been tinkering with since high school. He's the kind of guy who monitors radio frequencies the way some people watch birds. So when WKRL came back to life on a Thursday night in early October, Marcus was one of the first to hear it. He called me at 2 in the morning. I was at my mother's house, sorting through closets surrounded by boxes of her things, and I almost didn't pick up. "Tune your radio to 16:30 a.m., he said. "Why? Just do it." I dug my mother's old transistor radio out of the kitchen junk drawer, extended the antenna, and turned the dial. Static, 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 and then a voice, clear and close, as if the speaker were sitting in the room with me. A man's voice, mid-register, unhurried, almost gentle. He was reading an address, 4511 Ridgemont Drive, then another, 78 Orchard Lane, then another. He read each one with a brief pause between, the way you'd read a list of names at a memorial. No music, no station identification, no commercials. Just the voice and the addresses and the faint electrical hum of a live microphone. "What is this?" I said. "That's WKRL, Marcus said, 163:30 a.m. That frequency has been dead for almost 40 years. I checked. The license was never reassigned. There's no legal broadcaster on that frequency within 500 miles of here. So it's a pirate station. It's broadcasting from the old tower." I ran a signal trace. "It's coming from Cheswick Hill, Ethan." From the original transmitter, I listened for another 30 seconds. The man read 3 more addresses. I recognized one of them. It was on my street, 2 houses down from my mother's. "Who is that?" I asked. Marcus was quiet for a moment. Then he said, I played a clip for my dad. He says, "It sounds like Dale Morrow." I didn't know that name. Not then. But by the following morning, I knew everything about Dale Morrow that the town of Harlow was willing to tell me, which turned out to be less than what the town of Harlow actually knew. Dale Morrow was the voice of WKRL from 1979 to 1987. He hosted a late-night call-in show called Night Frequency. 3 hours every weeknight, 10 to 1. By all accounts, it was the most popular thing on the station. Dale had a voice that made people trust him. Warm, patient, the kind of voice you'd want reading you the news during a crisis. He took calls from anyone. People talked about their days, their marriages, their kids. Farmers called in about weather. Insomniacs called in just to hear another human being. In a town like Harlow in the 80s, before cable news and the internet turned every living room into a portal, Dale Morrow's show was the shared nervous system of the community. Everyone listened. Everyone felt like Dale was talking to them specifically. In October of 1987, Dale started saying things on the air that made people uncomfortable. This part of the story I got from Corinne Voss. Corinne was WKRL's receptionist and office manager from 1980 until the station closed. She's in her late 60s now, lives alone on the south end of town, and when I knocked on her door 2 days after the broadcast started, she looked at me like I was carrying a warrant. "I'm not talking about this," she said. "Corinne, there's a broadcast coming from the tower right now, tonight. I know, people are listening. People are going to the addresses he's reading out. I know that too. Then help me understand what's happening." She let me in. She made coffee with shaking hands, and she sat at her kitchen table and told me about October 1987, and the whole time she spoke, she kept glancing at the radio on her windowsill, as if she expected it to start talking back. Here's what happened. In the first week of October 1987, Dale Morrow began receiving documents. He never said from whom. They arrived at the station in manila envelopes with no return address, photocopied pages, handwritten notes, what looked like internal memoranda from Marsh Chemical. Dale read excerpts on the air during Night Frequency. Not the whole documents, not yet. just fragments, a reference to Eastern Disposal Site, a note about acceptable contamination threshold, a line from a letter that read, "The families in the affected area have been advised that the water discoloration is a seasonal mineral issue and will resolve without intervention." People started calling in. Rinnie told me. Not the usual callers, angry people from the east side of town. They said their kids were sick. They said the water tasted wrong. They said they'd been complaining for months and nobody at the town office would take their calls. She paused, and Dale let them talk. He let them say everything. Within a week, the station's phone lines were overwhelmed. Dale was broadcasting call after call. Testimony from families in the eastern neighborhoods of Harlow who believed their water supply had been contaminated by Marsh Chemicals disposal operations. The documents he'd received appeared to confirm it. Internal memos discussed a series of illegal dumps in an area adjacent to the municipal water intake. Soil reports showed elevated levels of industrial solvents, and there was a letter. Corinne said she saw Dale hold it up in the booth, a single page, signed by Gerald Marsh, authorizing a payment of $25,000 to the Harlow town manager in consideration of continued cooperation regarding the eastern parcel. My grandfather binds silence about poisoned water. Dale wanted to go public, Corinne said. He wanted to contact the EPA, the state health department, the Albany papers. He told me he had enough to start an investigation, but the station owner, Ray Calloway, got a call. I don't know who from. And the next day, Ray told Dale the documents were unverified and he couldn't discuss them on the air anymore. Dale said he'd take them to the press himself. Ray fired him on the spot, but Dale didn't leave. Not right away. On October 29th, 1987, Dale broke into the station after hours, powered up the transmitter, and did one final broadcast. He read every document he had, every name, every figure, every internal memo. He read the letter with my grandfather's signature. He read the soil reports. He read a list of 17 children from the eastern neighborhoods who'd been hospitalized with unexplained symptoms between 1984 and 1987. 4 of those children had died. He was on the air for 2 hours before someone cut the power to the building. That night, the station caught fire. The official report called it an electrical fault. Corinne called it what it was. They burned it, she said. Whoever Ray called, whoever was protecting your grandfather, they burned the station with Dale inside. Dale Morrow's body was never recovered. The fire was hot enough to compromise the building's structure, and the interior collapsed. The assumption was that Dale died in the blaze. The station's license was surrendered. The transmitter was shut down. The tower was left standing because nobody could agree on who was responsible for removing it. And the town of Harlow did what towns do when the truth is too expensive to acknowledge. It folded the story into local legend, softened the edges, and moved on. Dale Morrow became a cautionary tale about a radio host who went crazy and set fire to his own station. The documents were never mentioned. The children from the eastern neighborhoods were never mentioned. My grandfather continued to run Marsh Chemical until his death in 1991, at which point my father sold the company's assets and we all pretended the money was clean. I was born in 1992. I grew up in a house built by that money. I went to college on that money, I never knew. By the 3rd day of the new broadcast, I knew all of this, and I also knew that 3 people in Harlow had gone missing. The first was Janet Hadley, my mother's neighbor. Janet was 71. A retired nurse, lived alone since her husband passed. On the second night of the broadcasts, Dale's voice gave an address, 14 Birch Lane, and said that someone should go look in the filing cabinet in the back room, bottom drawer, under the tax folders. Janet drove to 14 Birch Lane at 1 o'clock in the morning. 14 Birch Lane was a rental property that had been empty for 6 months. Janet went inside. She did not come out. The second was Tom Brecker, a 58-year-old retired trucker. Dale told him where to go, and Tom went. The third was Ann Pulaski, who taught 4th grade at Harlow Elementary for 30 years. All 3 followed specific instructions broadcast on 163:30 a.m. All 3 disappeared. What I need you to understand is that these people were not compelled. There was nothing supernatural about the broadcast. No one was hypnotized or mind-controlled or drawn by some irresistible frequency. They were people who heard a voice on the radio tell them something specific about their lives, something true, something private, something that mattered, and they made a choice to follow the thread. Curiosity, guilt, the unbearable weight of a secret they'd been sitting on for decades. Dale knew which buttons to press because Dale had been studying these people for a very long time. We held a meeting at the Harlow Community Center on the third night. It was a mess. About 80 people showed up, which for Harlow was a significant turnout, and they were divided roughly into 3 camps. Marcus and I were in the first camp. Find the source, stop the broadcast, locate the missing people. Marcus had already contacted the FCC to report an unauthorized transmission, but the bureaucratic timeline for that kind of complaint is measured in weeks, and we didn't have weeks. He wanted to go up to Cheswick Hill and physically shut down the transmitter. I agreed. Reverend Paul Toller led the second camp. Paul was the pastor at First Presbyterian, and the closest thing Harlow had to a civic leader. He stood at the front of the community center in his gray cardigan and told everyone to stay calm, stay home, and stop listening. This is a hoax, he said, or a prank, or some troubled individual with too much time in an old transmitter. The best thing we can do is deny it an audience, turn off your radios, don't go where it tells you to go. This ends when we stop giving it power. He wasn't wrong about the advice. He was wrong about the scale. The third camp was harder to define. These were people, mostly older, mostly from families that had been in Harlow for generations, who sat in the back of the community center and said very little. I noticed Corinne among them. They weren't arguing for or against anything. They were just afraid in a way that seemed deeper and older than 5 days of strange radio. They knew something the rest of us were still catching up to. You don't understand. Corinne told me afterward in the parking lot, her voice barely above a whisper. It's not about the radio, it's about what he's going to say next. On the fourth night, Dale changed tactics. Up until then, the broadcast had been informational, addresses, names, references to documents and locations. Creepy, yes, distressing, certainly, but abstract in a way that let you maintain distance. You could tell yourself it was a database, a public record search, a clever manipulation. You could tell yourself that the voice on the radio was working from information anyone could find if they looked hard enough. On the fourth night, Dale started describing the insides of people's homes. I was at Marcus's place when it happened. We were in his garage, surrounded by his radio equipment, trying to triangulate the exact source of the signal. When the broadcast shifted, Dale's voice dropped half a register, became almost intimate, and he said, Frank DeLuca is sitting in his living room right now. Brown recliner, the one with the tear on the left armrest that he covered with a strip of duct tape last March. He's watching the 10 o'clock news, with the volume on 14. There's a glass of milk on the end table, 2%. He always drinks a glass of milk before bed. He'll turn the TV off in about 20 minutes, check the lock on the front door. He always checks it twice and go upstairs. The hallway light will stay on because Frank has been leaving the hallway light on since his wife died. He doesn't like the dark anymore. Marcus and I stared at the radio. The silence in the garage was total. The bathroom window on the second floor doesn't close all the way. Dale continued. Frank knows this. He stuffed a dish rag in the gap. It's a blue dish rag with a pattern of small white flowers. If you pulled it out and opened the window fully, you could reach the latch from outside without any difficulty at all. Marcus picked up his phone and called Frank DeLuca. It rang 4 times. Frank answered. Marcus asked him as casually as he could manage what he was doing right now. Watching the news, Frank said. Why? What are you sitting in? My recliner. Marcus, what the hell is this about? Is there a glass of milk on your end table? A pause. How do you know that? Marcus hung up and looked at me, and for the first time since this started, I saw fear in his face that went beyond concern or confusion. This was the fear of someone who has just realized the problem is not what he thought it was. A pirate broadcaster is a nuisance. A person who knows what's in your living room right now, who can see your duct tape chair and your glass of milk and the dish rag in your bathroom window, is something else entirely. He's been inside their houses. Marcus said, Ethan, He's been inside their houses. We went to my mother's house. My house now, I suppose, though I've never been able to call it that. We went through every room. Marcus checked the windows and doors while I looked for anything out of place. I almost convinced myself there was nothing. Then I walked into the kitchen and stopped. One of the chairs at the table was pulled out. Not shoved back carelessly the way I leave them, but pulled out at an angle, as if someone had sat down and then stood up without pushing the chair back in. There was a faint ring of condensation on the counter near the sink, a water ring from a glass. I hadn't used a glass in the kitchen that day. I'd been out since 8 in the morning. I checked my mother's bedroom. The window was unlocked. I lock that window every night. It's a ground floor window facing the backyard, and I'm meticulous about it because the backyard is dark, and the motion light has been broken since before my mother died. I locked that window. I'm certain that I locked that window. Nothing else was wrong. Nothing was missing. But that night, lying in bed with every light in the house on and my phone on my chest, I kept catching a smell. Something faint and organic, like damp canvas, like clothes that have been air-dried in a room without ventilation. It was in the kitchen chair's cushion. I'd pressed my face to it like a lunatic, breathing in, and it was there. Someone else's smell, in my house, on my furniture. And then Dale's voice came through the radio on my nightstand. I'd left it on. I couldn't stop leaving it on, and he said an address I recognized. My address, and he said Ethan Marsh is lying in bed right now with the lights on. He can smell it, can't he? That's how close I've been. That's how long I've been here. I did not sleep that night. The next morning, Marcus and I drove up to Cheswick Hill. We were done waiting for the FCC. We were going to find the transmitter and shut it off ourselves. Marcus brought bolt cutters for the gate and a toolbox in case we needed to physically dismantle something. The station building was a squat cinder block rectangle at the base of the tower, fire blackened and partially collapsed on one side. The gate was padlocked, but the chain was old and Marcus cut through it in 2 seconds. We went inside. The equipment was there. New equipment, not the original 1987 hardware, but modern gear. A digital audio processor, a solid-state transmitter small enough to fit on a desk, a laptop running automated broadcast software, feeding a pre-recorded audio cue through the transmitter, and a microphone still warm to the touch, with a red light glowing steadily on the console beside it. The broadcasts weren't all pre-recorded. Some of them were live. Dale was here sometime. He sat in this chair, in this ruined building, and spoke into this microphone, and his voice went out across the valley. Marcus started disconnecting cables. I looked around the rest of the building. In the back room, what had probably been a storage area or office, I found where Dale had been living. A narrow cot against the wall, a sleeping bag neatly rolled, canned food stacked on a shelf, beans, soup, tuna, dozens of cans, all organized by type, a plastic jug of water, a camp stove, a battery-powered lantern, and notebooks. Dozens of them, maybe 50 or 60, filling 2 large plastic storage bins and stacked on the floor beside them. Composition notebooks, the kind you buy at a drugstore with marbled black and white covers. I opened one. The handwriting was small, precise, and incredibly dense. Every page was filled margin to margin. Dates ran along the left side, and beside each date, observations. Frank DeLuca, November 3, 2019. Arrived home 5:47 p.m. Lights on in kitchen by 5:52. Moved to living room by 6:30. Television on. Volume moderate bedroom light on by 10:15. Off by 10:40. Front door checked twice before retiring. I opened another notebook. Janet Hadley, March through August 2022. Her daily routine cataloged in the same obsessive detail: when she left the house, when she came back, who visited, what she carried in from the car, which lights she turned on at night, and in what order. I opened another Tom Brecker, another Ann Pulaski, another Margaret Coburn, another Reverend Toller, another Corinne Voss, every person who had been named on the broadcast, every person who had been described. All of them watched, all of them documented for years. Some of the notebooks went back more than a decade. I found one with my mother's name on the cover. Helen Marsh. It began in 2014 and ended with her death the previous month. The last entry read, September 14th. Helen did not come downstairs today. Lights remained off. I believe she has passed. Her son will come soon. And underneath that, in the same careful handwriting, he doesn't know what his family did. He will. Marcus appeared in the doorway. Transmitters disconnected, he said. Then he saw my face. Then he saw the notebooks. He walked over, picked one up, read a page and set it down. He didn't say anything for a long time. How long has he been here? Marcus finally asked. I don't think he ever left. I meant it. Looking at the dates in those notebooks, looking at the canned food rotated by expiration, looking at the cot and the sleeping bag and the camp stove, I understood something that I think the whole town had been refusing to understand. Dale Morrow did not die in the fire of 1987. He survived and he stayed. He lived in the margins of Harlow in empty buildings, in basements, in the crawl spaces and utility closets and forgotten rooms of a town that had tried to kill him. And he watched, for 37 years he watched. He walked past the schools. He sat in the back pew during Sunday services. He stood in backyards at 2 in the morning and looked through windows. He memorized routines, cataloged habits, documented lives. He was patient in a way that I cannot describe without feeling the skin on my arms tighten. Because patience like that is not a human virtue. It's something else. Something that burned away everything in Dale Morrow except the need to finish what he started. Marcus disconnected the transmitter, and we left. For about 6 hours, the frequency was silent. Then it came back. Dale had a second transmitter or a third. I don't know. Marcus said it was possible to set up a low-power AM broadcaster with a few $100s worth of equipment. You could run one out of a car, out of a backpack, out of any building with a power outlet. We'd shut down the main tower. But Dale didn't need the main tower. He'd used it for range and sound quality, but he could keep going with less. And he did. That night, the broadcast changed again. Dale stopped describing houses. He stopped reading addresses. Instead, he began reading documents. The same documents from 1987, but more. More memos, more letters, more evidence. He read soil analysis reports, commissioned by Marsh Chemical in 1985, that showed trichloroethylene levels in groundwater near the eastern neighborhoods at 40 times the legal limit. He read internal correspondence between my grandfather and the plant manager, discussing the eastern problem and concluding that remediation would cost more than the value of the affected properties. He read the names of the 4 children who died. He read their ages. Diane Pulaski, age 7, Robert Fenton, age 4, Maria Castellano, age 9, James Hadley, age 6. James Hadley, Janet Hadley's grandson. I understood then why Janet had followed the broadcast's instructions without hesitation. She'd been carrying that name for decades. Dale read a letter from Gerald Marsh to Bill Coburn, Margaret's husband, thanking him for his discretion and continued cooperation regarding the transport of materials from the eastern facility. He read the amount of the enclosed payment, $15,000. Hush money for a truck driver who knew what he was hauling and where it went. He read a list of every family that received payments. There were 23 families in Harlow who took money to stay quiet about poisoned water and dead children. Some of those families were still here. Their names were names I recognized. Names from church, from the grocery store, from the community center meeting. Names of people I'd grown up around. I sat in my mother's kitchen and listened to Dale dismantle my town, name by name, dollar by dollar, and I felt something I still don't have the right word for. It wasn't shock. I'd had Corinne's version for 2 days by then. It was more like watching a controlled demolition. The charges had been placed years ago. Dale was just pressing the button. The town fractured that night. I don't mean metaphorically. I mean that by morning, there were people on the east side of Harlow, descendants of the affected families, people who had lost parents and grandparents and siblings to cancers and organ failures they'd never been able to explain, standing in the street outside the homes of people Dale had named as recipients of Marsh Chemicals payments. There was shouting. There was a brick through Ray Calloway's front window. Ray, the former station owner who'd fired Dale, and was now 83 and living in a care facility. His son's window, technically. The son came out with a baseball bat and the police were called, and for a while it felt like the whole town was going to come apart. And through all of it, Dale kept broadcasting. I found Marcus at his garage. He was sitting on the floor with his back against his workbench, staring at the wall. "We need to call the state police," he said. "FBI. Somebody with jurisdiction and resources. This is kidnapping, Ethan. 3 people are missing. A man is broadcasting threats and surveillance data from an unknown location. This is federal." "I know. So why are you making that face?" "Because everything he's saying is true. All of it. The documents, the payments, the contamination. Everything he's reading on the air is real. And if we shut him down, it goes back in the ground. 3 people are missing." "I know 3 people are missing. So what's the question?" He was right. There shouldn't have been a question. 3 people were gone. A man was terrorizing the town. And the correct response was obvious. Call the authorities. Find the missing people. Arrest Dale Morrow. Simple. Clean. Right. Except that the authorities in Harlow had known about the contamination for 40 years and done nothing. The town manager who took my grandfather's money retired on a full pension. The children who died were buried without investigation. The families who got sick were told it was seasonal minerals in the water. The whole structure of official response that Marcus wanted to invoke was the same structure that had protected my grandfather. Silenced Dale and burned a radio station to the ground. Calling them felt like calling the arsonist to investigate the fire. That was the dilemma. Not whether to act, of course we had to act, but through what means and at what cost, and whether the right answer and the available answer were even in the same room together. On the 7th night, Dale spoke to me directly. I was at my mother's kitchen table with Marcus and Corinne. We were going over everything we knew, trying to figure out where Dale might be transmitting from now that the tower was shut down. Corinne was shaking. She'd been shaking for days. She told us that she'd known about the contamination since 1987, not the details, but enough. She'd seen the documents Dale received. She'd heard the calls from the East Side families, and when the station burned and Dale disappeared, she'd made the same choice as everyone else. She'd stayed quiet. "I had a daughter in school," she said. "I had a mortgage. I told myself it wasn't my business. I told myself someone else would handle it. Nobody said anything. There wasn't anything to say. The radio on the counter was tuned to 1630, because we couldn't stop listening in the same way you can't stop pressing on a bruise." Dale had been reading more documents, a series of medical records now, discharge summaries from the county hospital, and then he stopped. There was a pause long enough that I thought the signal had dropped. Then, "Ethan," my name in that steady voice. I felt my whole body go cold. "Ethan, I know you found the notebooks. I know you shut down the tower. I know you're sitting in your mother's kitchen right now with Marcus Cole and Corinne Voss trying to figure out where I am. You're not gonna find me by looking at signal patterns. I'll come to you." Marcus was already on his feet, moving to the window, looking out into the dark yard. "I'm not going to hurt you," Dale said. "I was never going to hurt anyone. I want you to understand that the people who followed my broadcast, Janet, Tom, Anne, they're safe. They're with me because they chose to be after I showed them what I have. What your family did, what this town decided was an acceptable price for keeping the factory open." Another pause, the hum of the microphone. "I want to talk to you, Ethan. Come to the station tomorrow night. The old building on Cheswick Hill. Come at 10. Come alone, or bring your friends. It doesn't matter. This is almost over. I just need someone from your family to hear it from me." The broadcast resumed its document readings. My hands were flat on the table. I could feel my heartbeat in my wrists. "Don't go," Marcus said immediately. He said they're alive. He's a man who's been stalking an entire town for 40 years. Whatever he says, the situation is the same. We call the FBI tonight and tell them what a man we can't find is broadcasting documents that prove a crime the county government helped cover up. You think they're going to move fast on that? You think there's going to be a tactical team on Cheswick Hill by morning? You're not going up there alone. He said I could bring people. Ethan, listen to me. Marcus grabbed my arm. I know about your grandfather. I know what's in those documents. But this man has been living in the walls of this town for almost 4 decades. He has been inside our homes. He has watched us sleep. Whatever he is now, he's not a whistleblower, he's something else. He was right about that. But he was also wrong, and the wrongness mattered, because Dale Morrow had tried to tell the truth in 1987, and the town had tried to murder him for it. And everything since then, the notebooks, the surveillance, the broadcasts, was the shape that truth-telling takes when every legitimate channel has been sealed shut. I didn't have to approve of the shape to understand it. Corinne spoke from the table without looking up. He's going to tell you about the Hadley boy, James. He's going to tell you how your grandfather knew the water was killing children and chose to keep the factory running. He's going to make you sit there and listen, because that's what he wanted in 1987. For someone from your family to just sit and listen, and nobody would. I went. Marcus came with me. Corinne stayed behind. We drove up Cheswick Hill at 9:45 on the 8th night. The road was unpaved, rutted, canopied by trees that blotted out the sky. The tower's red warning lights had been dead for years, but someone had rigged a new one. A small LED beacon, blinking at the top, visible from a mile away. The station building was dark except for a faint warm light in the back window. Marcus parked and we sat in the car for a full minute listening. The radio was on. Dale was broadcasting, but not documents now. He was just talking, in a quiet, reflective voice about a town he'd loved once. About the way Harlow sounded at night in the 80s. The crickets and the train and the faint music from the bar on Main Street. About a girl named Elaine, who used to call his show every Thursday to talk about her garden. About the way the valley looked in autumn from the top of this hill. The reds and golds, the smoke from chimneys. He sounded like a man saying goodbye. We went inside. Dale Morrow was sitting in a folding chair in the back room, next to a card table with a microphone and a small portable transmitter. He was 71 years old, thin, with white hair and a face that didn't match itself. The left side was smooth and weathered in the ordinary way of old men, and the right side was a landscape of scar tissue, mottled and tight, the skin pulled taut over the cheekbone and jaw. Burn scars. His right ear was mostly gone. His right eye was clouded. He was smaller than I expected, shorter than me, narrower in the shoulders, the kind of frame that disappears in a crowd. I realized that was the point. He was built to not be seen. "Sit down, Ethan," he said. His voice in person was exactly like it was on the radio. The same warmth, the same patience. It made my skin crawl. "Where are the missing people?" Marcus said from behind me. "They're in the house at 14 Birch Lane. The one Janet went to first. They're not locked in. The front door is unlocked. I told them they could leave whenever they wanted, and I meant it. None of them have chosen to leave yet." "Why not?" Dale looked at Marcus mildly. "Because I showed them what I'm about to show Ethan, and they're still processing it. Give them time." He turned to me. "Sit down," he said again, "please." I sat. Marcus stayed standing near the door, his phone in his hand, ready to call 911. Dale didn't seem to care. The card table was covered in documents. Not photocopies now. Originals. Yellowed paper, faded ink, official letterheads. Dale laid them out one by one, narrating as he went, in the same measured voice he used on the air. He showed me the soil reports. He showed me the hospital records. He showed me the internal memos with my grandfather's signature. He showed me photographs, poorly lit, slightly blurred, of rusted barrels half buried in earth at the eastern edge of the Marsh chemical property, each one stenciled with chemical codes and hazard symbols. He showed me the death certificates, 4 of them, 4 children. Causes of death listed as renal failure, hepatic failure, acute leukemia, systemic organ failure, all under the age of 10. All from the same 6-block area on the east side of Harlow, all within a 3-year window. He showed me the payments, not just Bill Coburn's, 23 families, each one documented. The amount, the date, the signed non-disclosure agreement. I don't know if they all understood what they were agreeing to. Dale said some of them were scared, some of them needed the money. but they all signed. He showed me the letter from the town manager to my grandfather, confirming that the matter has been resolved to the satisfaction of all involved parties and recommending that the Eastern Well system be quietly taken offline and replaced with a connection to the county water main, which can be attributed to routine infrastructure improvement. The Eastern Well system quietly taken offline. Children were dead and they fixed it by rerouting the plumbing and calling it an upgrade. I looked at all of it, every page. I took my time. Dale let me. He sat across the table and watched me with his one good eye. And he didn't rush me. And he didn't editorialize. He just let the documents do what documents do. When I was done, I said, "Why didn't you go to the press? After 1987, you survived. You had all of this. Why not take it to a newspaper, a lawyer, the EPA?" "I did," Dale said. "In 1988, I mailed copies to the Albany Times-Union, to the State Attorney General, and to the EPA Regional Office." The Times-Union ran a brief item on page 14 about unsubstantiated allegations against a chemical company in western New York. The Attorney General's office sent a form letter. The EPA opened a preliminary inquiry that was closed 8 months later for insufficient evidence, because the town had already rerouted the water supply and the soil at the disposal site had been paved over. Your grandfather donated $40,000 to the state Republican Party that year. I don't know if that's connected. I know the inquiry went away. He folded his hands. The scarred skin on his right hand was shiny and hairless. So I stopped trusting channels and I stayed. And I watched and I waited until I had so much that no one could dismiss it. And then I used the only channel that ever worked, the radio. Because in 1987, when I put people's voices on the air, the town listened. The town was furious and scared, but it listened. Nothing else ever made them listen. "You terrorized people," Marcus said from the doorway. "You broke into their homes. You stalked them for decades. You described their bedrooms on a public broadcast. You are not a whistleblower. You're a... I know what I am," Dale said. And for the first time, his voice had an edge. Not anger. Something harder. Like a blade tested against a thumb. "I know exactly what I am. I've had 37 years to think about it. Do you know what you are? Do you know what this town is?" Nobody answered. "I want Ethan to read the documents," Dale said. On the air. Right now into the microphone. Everything I just showed him. I want Marsh to say it out loud. On the same frequency where I tried to say it in 1987. That's what this has been for. Not the surveillance, not the notebooks, those were just so I'd know when the time was right and who needed to hear what. The broadcast is the point. The truth spoken by someone whose family created the lie. That's all I want. That's the last broadcast. I looked at the microphone. The red light was on. It had been on the entire time. "We've been on the air this whole time," I said. "Since you walked in," Dale said. "Everything we've said. Everyone tuned to 1630 has heard it." I felt a floor shift under me. Not literally, the building was solid enough, but something structural, something foundational. Moved every word I'd spoken in this room had gone out across the valley. My questions, Marcus's accusations, Dale's explanations, the town had heard all of it. "You broadcast this without telling us," Marcus said, and his voice was stretched thin. "I broadcast the truth without permission," Dale said. "That's what I've always done. It's the only thing I've ever done." He gestured at the microphone. "But this part, the documents, the names, the proof, I want Ethan to read them. I want his voice on it, not mine. I'm the man they burned." Nobody trusts the man they burned, but Gerald Marsh's grandson sitting in the station reading his grandfather's own letters. That's different. That's the thing I can't do myself. I looked at the documents on the table. I looked at the death certificates. Diane Pulaski, 7. Robert Fenton, 4. Maria Castellano, 9. James Hadley, 6. And then what, I asked. Then I'd turn it off, the transmitter, the microphone, all of it. I'm done. I've been done for a long time. I've been waiting to be done. The missing people, I'll call the police myself and tell them where everyone is. Like I said, the door's unlocked. It was always unlocked. Marcus stepped forward. "Ethan, don't. This is coercion. He engineered this whole situation to put you in this chair. Don't let him. He's right though, I said. Marcus stared at me. He's right about what happened. He's right about my grandfather. He's right that every official channel failed. He's right that the town chose to forget. He's right about the kids. Marcus. 4 children died and my family paid 23 families to pretend it didn't happen. And it worked. For 40 years, it worked. That doesn't make this okay. No, it doesn't. Nothing about this is okay. But the documents are real, and someone has to read them. And he's not wrong that it matters who. I sat down in front of the microphone. Dale slid the stack of documents across the table. I could feel the red light like a heat on the side of my face. I read. I read for almost an hour. Every memo, every letter, every name, every figure. I read my grandfather's words and my grandfather's grandson's voice, and I knew that across the valley, in living rooms and kitchens and bedrooms and cars, the people of Harlow were listening. I read the soil reports, I read the payment, I read the names of the dead children and their ages and how they died. My voice cracked twice. I did not stop. When I was done, the silence in the room was absolute. The microphone hum was the only sound in the world. Dale reached across the table and turned the transmitter off. The red light died. The hum stopped. "Thank you," he said. He picked up his phone and dialed 911. He gave his name, his location, and the address where Janet Hadley, Tom Brecker, and Ann Pulaski could be found. Then he set the phone on the table and sat back in his chair and looked at me with an expression that I have thought about every day since. It was not triumph, it was not satisfaction. It was the face of a man who has been holding a single breath for 37 years, and has finally let it go. And what's left after the breath is not relief, but just the enormous quiet of a body that no longer has a reason to keep itself clenched. The police arrived 20 minutes later. Dale went with them without resistance. He held his wrists out for the cuffs and walked to the car and did not look back at the tower or the building or the hill. He was done with all of it. The missing people were found at 14 Birch Lane, exactly where Dale said they'd be. The front door was unlocked. Janet was sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of cold tea. Tom was asleep on the couch. Anne was standing at the window, looking out at the street. And when the officers came in, she said, I know, I should have called. I just wasn't ready to come back yet." None of them had been restrained or threatened. Dale had shown them the same documents he showed me. He told them what their families' roles had been. Janet's silence about the sick children she treated as a nurse. Tom's father's trucks. Anne's late husband's position on the town board that approved the well rerouting. He'd let them sit with it in a quiet house with food and water and unlocked doors. He told them they could leave whenever they wanted. They stayed because the truth was heavy, and the world outside was the world that had generated the lie, and they needed time before they could carry both. I understand that. I understand it more than I want to. The aftermath was not quick, and it was not clean. The state attorney general opened an investigation within a week. The broadcast had been heard by thousands of people across the valley, and the documents I'd read on the air were subsequently entered into public record. Marsh Chemical's former disposal sites were tested. The soil was exactly as contaminated as Dale's reports had said. The eastern neighborhood's cancer rates, when someone finally bothered to compile them, were 4 times the county average going back to the 1980s. 3 more families came forward with their own payment records. A class action lawsuit was filed before the month was out. Dale Morrow was charged with kidnapping, stalking, breaking and entering, and unauthorized use of a radio frequency. His lawyer argued that the kidnapping charges were unsupported. The doors were unlocked, the occupants stayed voluntarily, and 2 of the 3 charges were eventually dropped. The stalking and B&E charges stuck. Dale pleaded guilty to both. He was sentenced to 6 years. He did not contest it. At his sentencing, he said one thing: I did what I did. I don't expect forgiveness, and I don't think I deserve it. But the truth is in the record now, and that's all I ever wanted. Corinne Voss testified at the civil proceedings about what she'd known since 1987. She was not charged with anything, but she sold her house and moved to Rochester. I don't blame her. Reverend Toller resigned from First Presbyterian after it came out that his father had been one of the 23 paid families. The church held a community meeting to address it. 40 people showed up, and nobody yelled, and nobody threw anything. They just sat in the pews and looked at each other, and the silence was worse than any shouting could have been. Marcus and I don't talk about it much. We're still friends. He was right that Dale's methods were criminal, and I was right that the truth wouldn't have surfaced without them. And both of those things are true simultaneously, and neither of us knows how to reconcile them. So we mostly talk about other things. He's building a new PC. I'm thinking about the house. My mother's house. The house Gerald Marsh built in 1961, with money from a chemical company that poisoned the town's water supply. I still live in it. I've been telling myself it's temporary. I'm just here until the estate is settled, until the lawsuit plays out, until I figure out what to do next. But it's been months and I'm still here. And the estate is simple and the lawsuit doesn't require my presence. And the truth is that I stay, because leaving would feel like the same thing the town did in 1987, another form of looking away. The tower came down in March. A demolition crew from Syracuse spent 2 days cutting it apart and hauling the steel away in flatbed trucks. Half the town came out to watch. I stood on the road with Marcus, and we watched the lattice framework collapse in sections, each one hitting the ground with a sound like a bridge giving way. When it was done, the hill looked naked. There was a scar in the earth where the base had been, and it looked like it would be there for a long time. The frequency is dead. 16:30 a.m. is static now, and it will stay static, and the FCC has formally decommissioned the allocation. Dale Morrow is in a minimum security facility upstate. He writes letters to his lawyer, clear and precise, in handwriting I recognize from the notebooks. The notebooks themselves are in evidence storage, all 63 of them. I drive past the old Marsh chemical site every day. They broke ground on a community park there last month. I stood at the fence and watched the backhoe chew into the earth, and I thought about the soil reports I'd read into a microphone on a dead man's radio station. I thought about the children who played in that dirt 40 years ago, and the children who'll play there next summer. I thought about whether anyone tested the ground before they started building. And I already knew the answer, because I'd called the county office and asked, and the woman on the phone had said they were still waiting on the environmental review, but construction was ahead of schedule and they didn't want to delay. I asked her to repeat that. She said the review is pending, but we've been cleared to begin site preparation. Cleared by whom? I asked. She didn't know. She transferred me. The line rang and no one picked up. I sat in my car outside the site for a long time after that. The backhoe kept digging. The dirt it pulled up was dark and wet, and it smelled like nothing, which is what trichloroethylene smells like at the concentrations that kill you. Like nothing at all. You'd never know. That's the thing about Harlow, you never know, unless someone told you and the last person who tried to tell you was burned alive for it. And the person after that went to prison. The radio is off, the tower is gone. The story is over. Dale said what he needed to say, and I said what I needed to say, and the courts will do whatever the courts do, and none of it changes what's in the ground.